Good evening and welcome to a very special program. It's been an incredible week for India, for the G20 process. In fact, one can say it's been an incredible year. And the reason is we have a Delhi declaration. Many people around the world would have said that a Delhi G20 declaration would have been impossible. Why is that the case? Because there are stark differences presently in the world on the issue of Ukraine. The exclusion of the word Russia seems to have sealed the entire issue with the Delhi declaration being made possible. But how did New Delhi and our negotiators, our Sherpa, along with the Sherpas of various other G20 nations actually get to a stage where in the context of the Ukraine war, the word Russia was omitted? That has been a huge diplomatic achievement, and it brings center stage once again what the key focal areas of G20 have been and remain as far as the G20 process is concerned. And what are those? Economic growth, financial inclusion, the entire climate issue as well. So with that out of the way, the entire Ukraine-Russia war being addressed in the manner in which it has, the focus once again turned to the core issues. One of those, the entire issue of inclusion. What do we mean by inclusion? Perhaps the biggest example of inclusion was the inclusion of the African Union, more than 1 billion plus as part of the G20 process. The inclusion of women, greater empowerment, the inclusion of India's digital backbone. That's an area where we have been wonderfully successful with a lot of experiences as far as digital public infrastructure with a unified payment interface as well. So with all of this in mind, this is what India proposed to the world. This is what India could actually offer also in terms of our experiences. This has been one of the key takeaways as far as this process is concerned. But this is really about India and our achievements which have taken place as a result of hard negotiations. How do countries across the world see these achievements? What we decided to do in this very special program is speak to experts, voices, prominent people all around the world from G20 nations, each and every G20 partner, to give you, our viewers, an idea of why G20 this time around was so very significant.
We drew the red lines of each country, and then we worked on a draft, and then several rounds of negotiations, and with bilaterals with each Sherpa. But I think the important thing that really worked was that I was working in partnership with the Brazilian Sherpa, the South African Sherpa, and finally I got the Indonesian Sherpa together. So it became a joint proposal of 4 emerging markets. And then I roped in Mexico, I roped in Turkey, I roped in all the other Saudi. So all of them joined hands. And because there was so much of pressure from the emerging markets, because our concern was that for us, development, growth issues are far more important than the war issue. So finally, we then negotiated with G7 countries, we then negotiated with Russia, we then negotiated with China, and only last night, I think we gave them the final draft. We took it to the last minute, gave them the final draft, and at that Sherpa meeting, I've told them that this is the final draft, because I've discussed with you in over 200 bilaterals about 5 different drafts. This is the final document which we have produced, which is progressive, which is based on UN principles, UN charters. Either you take it or the deal drops. And I also told them that if anybody has an objection to this, your leader can go and talk to my leader, which is the Prime Minister. So I pulled the weight of the Prime Minister into this at that time. As the Sherpa, I pulled the weight of the Prime Minister. I said, I will not discuss anymore. I've done 200 rounds of discussion. And if your leader feels strongly about it, go and tell the Prime Minister of India.
This is a historical event. From last many years we are pursuing about the alternative fuel and biofuel. India, we have the import of 16 lakh crore. The economic problem as well as it is a pollution point of view, it is a big problem. And today in India, we are making bioethanol from rice, from corn, from wheat, food grain, sugar molasses and sugarcane juice. At the same time, it is the success story of India that we are adding 20% ethanol in petrol, and now we have got the 100% ethanol flex engine car from Toyota, and that is to be on 60% on electricity and 40% on bioethanol. The ethanol rate is 60 rupees and petrol is 120 rupees. So it is beneficial to the consumer. It is going to reduce the pollution, and this type of technology, lot of we have got now. Our startup is doing excellent job, particularly making CNG and LNG, bio CNG, bio LNG from rice straw, popularly known as parali, and this different type of technology also going to help to the world. And I feel that this is to be a great event as far as the pollution is concerned. We are going to reduce the pollution, and now it is the G20 under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi ji has accepted. It is to be a great event, an historical and revolutionary event which is going to be helpful for the farmers, and that is to be a rural agriculture economy. It is to be very important for the country.
This is, I guess, a success in one respect. That is that many of us, myself included, didn't think that a statement would actually be forthcoming because the differences would be too large between the United States and its partners on the one side and Russia and China on the other. So the fact that that gap was bridged is a success. I have to say, though, in some ways, there will be some grumbling, certainly in Europe and by Ukraine, by the watering down of the language from the prior G20 meeting about Russia's war there. That will not go down terribly well there. But I think for the success of the G20 as a whole and for India's place in it, this was a compromise that perhaps was worth making. This statement does reflect a view that is widely held. This may not be the view from European capitals, and certainly not the consensus view here in Washington, D.C., where I work, but I think it's a widely held view, and to the extent that the G20 is reflecting a consensus that is increasingly globalized, that's worth understanding, and it's a new global reality.
Well, I suppose the worldview, and I can hardly speak for the entire world, all 8 billion people, is bound to be that this is a reasonable success in the circumstances. The world is obviously deeply divided. Two very important leaders, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, didn't come. But given that, the declaration looks ambitious and perfectly sensible. The proof of this pudding is in the eating, what actually happens after all these words. But I think that given the worries people had about what will be achieved, this must be regarded as a success. In terms of the view of India, the world generally has come to the idea that India is a very important and dynamic country. And this will, I think, probably underline that somewhat. But this is part of a broader reassessment or assessment of India's place in the world, and I think what the government has achieved here will reaffirm that it is indeed quite an important country.
That you cannot have more than 1.4 billion people excluded from such an important premier platform for international economic cooperation. It is also thanks to India as the host, which from the onset in its presidency of the G20 championed inclusivity, championed the stronger voice for smaller countries and developing economic countries. And so thanks go largely to India. But we are certainly delighted, and we see this as a very meaningful step going forward in terms of the various challenges that the world has to tackle with respect to climate change, with respect to security, that now Africa is going to be included in the deliberations of the G20 going forward. Yeah. Inclusion means a number of things to us as South Africa, but also more broadly as a continent. It includes representativity in key forums that, let's call it key global governance forums, key forums that look at developmental finance. It includes the reform of multilateral institutions, may it be the United Nations Security Council, the international development finance institutions. So it's not just representativity, but there has to be an ongoing process of reform that takes place, that takes into account the different dynamics that you find globally, particularly the challenges that are facing your smaller developing economic countries with respect to how they're impacted by climate change as well as other challenges that they face.
Well, I think it's been a tremendous success. It is a new level of Indian leadership that on the international stage in an important multilateral forum that is being demonstrated here. But in terms of achievements, from a Canadian perspective, I think three are of greatest importance. First, bringing the African Union and bringing Africa generally closer to the democracies that are really the engine of leadership inside the G20 by formally making them a member, by talking about this strategic route across Africa that should lead to investments in infrastructure and improvements in trade and access to markets for Africans and those trading into Africa. Secondly, the general push towards integrating Europe and Asia in ways that don't depend on the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which has been a disaster in many respects for many countries financially, has led to uneven results in terms of infrastructure and showing that there can be much more resilient results when the Middle East, Europe, India, and other Asian countries work on a flexible private sector driven basis with government support to integrate themselves and bring fair trade to larger numbers of people and prosperity to more places. Those are very important outcomes. I'd say the third one is that India is increasingly an important anchor of financial stability. We've seen India work even before this summit with Canada, with the United States, with Japan, and other hosts of previous G20s to resolve crises and to make the international financial system more resilient. India's reforms are anchoring that resilience in the international financial system in new ways, which is very important. And once again, a big contrast to the Chinese approach, which is very top-down and diktat-based. So a welcome leadership on the financial side by India as well. The Chinese leader is also uncomfortable with India having taken the torch of leadership in global growth away from China. China's economy is slowing in terms of its growth. India is increasing. And China is also an aggressor on India's borders. There are, for all the efforts to ensure diplomacy continues, there are very, very serious tensions between India and China, as we all know, because China does not recognize borders, has been engaged in covert and overt military operations along the Indian border. And that issue deserves as much attention as Russia's illegal invasion of China. These are two bully nations that haven't sent their leaders to Delhi. And the democracies, I think, are teaching them a lesson that real leadership does not involve the use of force and aggression.
I want to give credit to the leading role played by the Indian government and in particular played by Prime Minister Modi in making all these happy things happen in New Delhi. For the New Delhi declaration, I think it's a very remarkable achievement. And before the summit meeting, there was expectation that there might be a lot of differences and difficulties, which happily have been overcome. and the joint declaration is a very important document laying out the consensus view of all the member states, including China. The declaration also reaffirms the fact that G20 is not the equivalent of the Security Council of the United Nations and should focus on what its original mandate is, that is to promote economic and financial cooperation among the member states rather than being diverted to geopolitical issues which need to be handled by the Security Council of the United Nations. This is the correct decision, and I think this is also the basis upon which the consensus was eventually achieved involving all member states. There are territorial disputes between China and India, and my personal view is very clear. China and India need to use our maximum wisdom, patience, and courage and vision to solve diplomatically and peacefully the disputes between us, rather than being burdened down by the territorial disputes between us. And for China and India, which have the largest populations, each having a population of more than 1.4 billion, for us to engage in peace with each other is absolutely necessary and is the only right way going forward. Despite of our differences, neither China nor India should be hijacked by the territorial disputes between us, and we need to manage the differences and do our best in promoting diplomatic solution of these differences.
You know, Ukraine and Russia conflict, it is legal or not legal, time will show. But whatever they wanted, British, German, Mr. Scholz, they wanted that they should discuss, the main topic should be the Ukraine and Russian conflict. It was not done in this summit. So I think Mr. Modi took the best side, best neutral position he took. I think this is the best decision. And this summit is a unique summit because I can imagine very big pressure was in India, on India to take the decision, take the declaration to the West for West countries. So it was not done. India took very neutral position. They are very good friends. They can talk anytime. They can meet anytime. They are very best friends. I think anything, if need, they will decide directly without this summit.
This is a huge announcement, and now that it has been confirmed and officially announced by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince in his speech yesterday, we should say that as significant as this project is, it comes as no surprise. In fact, it's very logical. Saudi Arabia and India consecutively are the two largest growing economies in the G20. As we speak now, there are more than 8 million Indian expats living and working in the GCC countries. As we've seen over the past few years, the interconnectivity and the interdependence of the world in different places across the world hasn't been any more important. So a project like this connecting India to the Arab world, to Europe, cannot come at a better time, and I cannot even stress how important it is. Ambition is the key word here, and as you've seen yesterday and previously when His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed visited in February 2019, there is a deep personal bond and a lot of chemistry between His Royal Highness and His Excellency Prime Minister Modi, and the key word here is ambition. The ambition is through the roof. Both countries are the fastest growing economies in the G20, and both believe in the peace and prosperity and sustainability, not just for their own countries, but for their whole world. So that's the key that's driving this and making this happen. As for your other point regarding China, look, each country will look at it from its own perspective, but I seriously doubt world leaders on this level will be looking at not at their own interest first. The question is, does this connectivity between India, the Arab world, and Europe serve the interests of India, the Arab world and Europe? And the answer is absolutely yes. Think of the 8 million expats living in the GCC country, Indian expats, how easy it's now going to be for them to connect back and forth to their home country in India, although we truly believe they are in their second home in our countries. And look at the size of shipments of trade and goods between between the Indian businesses and their Saudi or the Gulf counterparts. As it stands today, India imports anything between 500 to 800,000 barrels of oil a day from Saudi Arabia, and 1/3 of its oil needs come from the GCC. So the size of trade between India and the region is huge, and I seriously think that is the first and foremost interest to be served here.
Well, I think it's a very important and historic day for India. And when we look at G20, we are reminded of a very important fact that the Indian diplomacy today, there are very few diplomats who are more essential to the remarkable rise of India. I mean, the success of G20 is an inside look at the well springs of the Indian foreign policy, whether it be America, whether it be Russia, whether it be China. Prime Minister Modi has been decisively present at every significant moment in the last decade. I think G20 is reflective of the leaders' events and the forces that formed relations between India and the world. Especially, G20 has changed the face of India on the earth. Today, there is hardly any area of activity in which the world can do without India. India is giving a lot to Japan in the digital transformation. We have a new digital ministry here, and we had a joint bilateral digital meeting. And as it stands today, the G20 declaration is very, very helpful, especially to Japan, in the sense that the Indian ambassador recently announced that he's going to have a 10-fold Indian presence, especially based on this digital transformation. He has said that, we have 1,500 Japanese companies in India at the moment, and he wants to raise that to 15,000 in 3 years.
First and foremost, I would really like to congratulate India on its presidency of the G20 2023. The logo of one world, one earth, one future, amazing, brilliant, reinforcing what we have most of us Indians, even though we are based overseas, abroad and in Australia, believe in, which is the world is one family. The numerous events that have taken place in India across the year is truly a testament of how well India actually embraced the spirit of G20 and the significance of G20. So I have to say, I'm really a very proud Australian Indian business leader to be talking today to you about what India has contributed and how it has hosted the G20. On that front, I would also like to pass on my congratulations to the Prime Minister, PM Modi, and his Sherpas, his ministers, and all the team members who have done an amazing job in bringing it all together. I really do feel very proud to share that I'm an Australian Indian and definitely owe a lot to India where I am today. I reckon some of the impact areas in terms of the Australian takeaway would be probably definitely the global financial system, governance, digital economy, because India does, I was there just almost a month ago, and what I saw even in terms of street vendors and their adoption of digital economy is just an amazing phenomena. Not many countries realize how well placed India is at the moment where it comes to the digital.
It's been 2 years since we launched PGII, a joint vision by the world's leading economies to invest in the infrastructure that low and middle income countries need. And 2 years on, more large-scale projects are seeing the light, and we are presenting two of them today. First, the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. This is nothing but historic. It will be the most direct connection to date between India, the Arabian Gulf, and Europe, with a rail link that will make trade between India and Europe 40% faster, with an electricity cable and a clean hydrogen pipeline to foster clean energy trade between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, with a high-speed data cable to link some of the most innovative digital ecosystems in the world and create business opportunities all along the way. These are state-of-the-art connections for the world of tomorrow, faster, shorter, cleaner. This corridor is much more than just a railway or a cable. It is a green and digital bridge across continents and civilizations. And this is also the spirit of the second project we announced today, the Trans-African Corridor, which will connect the port of Lobito in Angola with the Katanga province in DRC and the Copper Belt in Zambia. Our goal is not only to connect a landlocked region to the sea. Our partnership will also invest in local value chains, in clean energy, and in skills for the local workforce. This is the spirit of PGII. It is a whole new approach to large infrastructure investment. It is about shared prosperity. It is about real benefits for all partners. Thank you.
Definitely this memorandum of maritime and rail connection between India, Europe, and Middle East is one of the crucial agreements that has been made. So yes, definitely, maybe I was more focusing on how is it perceived globally. So analysts and also outcomes here points out that maybe Washington won a bit over China. We can also underline that the leader, China's leader, Xi Jinping, hasn't been here. So this memorandum is very important also to mark the presence of Washington and President Biden. So in that terms, it's a very significant shift, I would say. Yes, India is definitely one of the protagonists in a global level. Let's say that you had a very challenging and huge achievements reached in the last decade. From the 10th, you became the 5th largest economy in the world, with the objective to become the 3rd. So definitely an important and crucial player in this part of the world. Of course, summit, I would say, of this proportion is also the only place where the global south can meet the Western countries, and in that sense also Italy, of course. When I'm saying global south, this is a very unprecedented organization marking Indian presidency next year, Brazilian one, and afterwards the South African one. So we have the global south that for the first time hosts such a big event of such a crucial occasion.
We were told, even by the Chancellor himself in the airplane, that they really appreciate the Indian presidency. It's a complicated one with a very important Russian and Chinese president not being here and lots of complicated issues. But as far as we hear, it's very efficient, very constructive, and very organized. And I think that President Modi could already announce that the AU, the African countries, are coming, and he could do that right away at the beginning, is a real success and surprise. I think that the AU, the African Union, is joining is a huge success, maybe even the success. It's 55 countries, it's 1.3 billion people, it's the fastest growing and youngest population. President Modi pushed very hard to get them in, Chancellor Scholz as well, and I think this is important to really make the Global South having a real big and be a real big membership, and for me it's one of the victories and successes of that presidency here. Yes,
one of the biggest takeaways, as I quoted here from the Indonesia's perspective represented by President Joko Widodo, one is that this forum is a call to provide more climate support to developing countries amid the disagreement among the world's major economies on the commitment. One of them is to reduce fossil fuel use and how to cut greenhouse gas emissions and increase renewable energy targets. As stated by President Joko Widodo during a press briefing at the closing of the latest 43rd ASEAN Summit in Jakarta, the same concern here is again being addressed, especially from the perspective of developing countries, as this transition must be a costly one for developing nations, which will need support from developed countries. Some highlights from Indonesia is that President Joko Widodo brings up the various funding mechanisms promised to developing countries, including the Just Energy Transition Partnership that was promised to Indonesia during the last year's G20 summit in Bali. Other concern is also about the global standards which are needed, such as in terms of grouping economic and business activities to prevent greenwashing practices. And we believe that this concern also speaks for other developing countries in the global south. And apart from the climate, we know that the G20 in New Delhi also adopted a declaration that avoided condemnation of Russia for the war in Ukraine, but called on all states to refrain from the use of force to seize territory. The consensus came as a surprise, as the group is deeply divided over the war in Ukraine, with Western nations earlier pushing for strong condemnation of Russia in the leaders' declaration, while other countries demanded a focus on broader economic issues. I believe that Indonesia has played a significant role in Delhi's summit, as a president expressed Indonesia's hope for the world to become one big family that collaborates and shares a common goal of creating a peaceful life. But then we realize that there are a lot of things that must be more committedly achieved to create a global stability. In a more specific takeaway, for example, it is believed that the Delhi summit takeaway could have brought a stronger commitment about the need to phase down unabated coal power, because as I follow, the declaration which was adopted by the G20 leaders did not mention cutting greenhouse emissions, for example, as well as they don't agree to reach a net zero commitments earlier than 2050. So we guess that a lot of homework on the commitment here is still on the line.
Mexico is very happy that the G20 summit, the leaders meeting, ended with a consensus declaration, which is something that something that we always achieve to have. So we're very happy that was done. Congratulations to the India team that was able to put together this consensus, and it implied a lot of hard work and getting together the different perspectives of all the countries that are members of the group. But I think that fortunately the outcome has been a good one, and we're very happy with the text of the declaration that was approved yesterday. And even though it may not be the most agreeable outcome for everyone, nevertheless a consensus was achieved, and I think an important one in that regard. But more than that, I think we should not lose sight of the fact that the declaration and the work that the G20 has been doing goes well beyond this one issue that has been a difficult one. And there's enormous advances and contributions on a broad range of issues like financial stability, the questions of climate change, and other issues such as progress that needs to be made for food security, for health security, for women empowerment. I think that's also a very relatively new and very important development. So overall, I think this have been successful steps in the right direction. We're very happy with that.
So the G20 summit came at a very opportune time in South Korea-India relations upon the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations. So our embassy here has been going out of its way to put up these lovely posters that really celebrate this special friendship that we have. And President Yoon himself, before his arrival in New Delhi, he spoke to the local paper and really emphasized how important India is as a strategic partner for South Korea, as a core actor in the Indo-Pacific region, sharing South Korea's core values such as freedom and democracy.
En primer lugar, creo que India ha sido un extraordinario presidente del G20 en este periodo.
First, I'd like to say that India has been a wonderful president and host of the G20.
Y han hecho un maravilloso trabajo que estamos disfrutando en este encuentro.
And you have done wonderful work that we are really enjoying at this meeting.
Es un momento muy difícil para organizar un encuentro como el G20.
It's a very hard moment to organize an event such as the G20 right now.
Básicamente por el conflicto de Ucrania y por la situación que el mundo atraviesa en general.
Basically because of the Ukrainian conflict and the situation that the world is undergoing right now.
Creo que la presidencia de India ha dado un paso gigante al incorporar a la Unión Africana al G20.
I think the Indian presidency has taken a huge step forward by incorporating the African Union into the G20.
Yo he propuesto que a partir de esa decisión se analice la posibilidad de ingresar al G20 a la comunidad de estados latinoamericanos y del Caribe, que viven una realidad muy parecida a la de África.
I have proposed that, based on that decision, the G20 should incorporate the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, which undergoes a situation very similar to that of the African Union.
Es muy claro que tenemos entre el norte y el sur realidades diferentes que afrontar.
It is quite clear that the north and the south have different realities.
India tiene en Modi un líder que todo el mundo reconoce y valora, y eso también pasa en Argentina.
India has in Modi a leader that everyone recognizes and commends, and that also is transmitted to Argentina.
Tenemos muchas cosas que hemos hablado con el primer ministro que podemos hacer entre India y Argentina, y en los temas vinculados a la defensa es uno de esos temas.
We have discussed with Prime Minister, with the Prime Minister of India, many initiatives, many things that we can do together, and one of those things has to do with defense.
My big takeaway from the G20 this time around, the Indian Prime Minister said at the outset there is a new world order. I'd say there's kind of a mix of a new world order and an old world order. What I mean by that is at the same time as we see a rising India, and it's here, as we see the African Union admitted as a full member, the superpower rivalries of old are also front and center. So it's a mix.
Yeah. How about Ukraine and the way the issue of Ukraine has been addressed?
Amazing how you can spin a story. If you listen to the French president, he said, quote, "Never has Russia been more isolated." If you hear Sergei Lavrov, the head of the Russian delegation, this G20 is a success because we managed to resist the West in its bid to Ukrainify the discussion.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And what about the bilateral process between India and France? Where do you see that right now? Energy and climate change obviously figure at the center, and also the strategic relationship.
Yeah, this is it. India championing itself as a voice for the global South. And at the same time, there is how you handle India itself, and India is a growing partner for France. on technology, on defense, and vis-a-vis the other rival, China. Again, that's where that mix of new and old kicks in. And perhaps not reported on enough is how much quietly the French, the Europeans, and the Indians are working on these projects such as green hydrogen, such as rail through the Middle East to Europe. Sounds a lot, Vishnu, like a rival to Belt and Road, doesn't it, a bit?
No, exactly, and that was exactly my question. Do you see it as a rival to the Belt and Road? Because officials here who I spoke to said, no, it's our own independent thing. But I think there are strategic convergences between India and France and many of the other countries to perhaps set that up as a counter to what China is doing.
Well, COVID was a wake-up call for us in France when we realized that our aspirin is made in China, our face masks are made in China, and our car batteries, by the way, are made in China for a large part, and they're working on that. It doesn't mean that France wants to break its ties with China. The language is not as adversarial as it is with the United States, and we heard European diplomats at this summit talk about how at times the U.S.-China rivalry hindered a little bit some of the debate, but it was also interesting how the final communique comes in on a Saturday. I've been to a lot of summits. A communique that comes early. But then when you see that Joe Biden's leaving for Vietnam, you also get the sense that India too has its favorites among the superpowers, and as a result of that, the French are part of that equation, albeit not at the same level as you, of course.
You had an Eastern camp with a different view of what's going on in Ukraine versus a Western camp with a very different geopolitical approach to Ukraine as well. So it was very important for the Indian leadership to be able to get a consensus and be able to say something in the declaration. When you have these types of consensus organizations, it's always very hard to be able to get a declaration on an issue that is very divisive globally. But India was able to achieve this while some of the language was toned down, and some Western countries may not have been fully satisfied. I think overall the ability to be able to produce a declaration on the war in Ukraine was very, very important, and it showed a lot of diplomatic accomplishment to be able to get countries that had very, very different views as China versus the United States. So, excuse me, that and all was very, very important to get that inside the declaration. Again, going forward, having the African Union become a member, I think this is a very landmark achievement going forward. Africa is becoming a very important driver in the global economy, increasing its market share of the global economy. A very important representative of the global South, the African Union, and being able to get this entity as part of the G20 will keep the G20 relevant and competitive versus other institutions going forward. So that was, of course, very important as well. I think that overall, looking at some of the comments coming from the Turkish president regarding the summit, I think Turkey was happy. I think that the Turkish government was very happy with how the developments in India transpired regarding the G20. Many of the developments are very in line with what Turkey expected, what Turkey wanted. Again, a very balanced declaration that included the war in Ukraine. The language was very balanced, and it reflects Turkish foreign policy a lot. Again, calling for a resumption to the grain deal, calling for an end of military hostilities. These are all very important to add into the declaration.
We need to redouble our efforts to achieve the goal of ending world hunger by 2030. Otherwise, we will be facing the biggest multilateral failure in recent years. Acting to fight climate change requires political will and determination from the rulers, as well as resources and technology transfer. We want greater participation of the emerging countries in the decision-making process of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The unbearable foreign debt of the poorest countries needs to be addressed. The WTO must be revitalized and its dispute settlement system must start working again. To regain its political strength, the UN Security Council needs to count on the presence of new developing countries among its permanent and non-permanent members. The international community looks at us with hope because we bring together economies from emerging countries and developed countries in the G20. We represent 80% of the global GDP, 75% of exports, and around 60% of the world's population. To ensure that the G20 acts in an inclusive and coherent manner, Brazil intends to organize work around three general guidelines. First, we will make the political and financial paths work in coordination and in a more integrated way. There's no point in agreeing on the best public policy if we do not allocate the necessary resources for its implementation. Second, we have to listen to civil society. There are no governments without civil society. The Brazilian presidency will ensure that engagement groups have the opportunity to report their conclusions and recommendations to government representatives. Thirdly, we cannot let geopolitical issues hijack the discussion agenda of the various G20 levels. We are not interested in a divided G20. Only through joint action may we face the challenges of our days. We need peace and cooperation instead of conflict. The path that will take us from New Delhi to Rio de Janeiro will require a lot of dedication and commitment from everyone. The technical groups and the preparatory ministerial meetings will be hosted in several cities in all our 5 regions of our country. For that reason, we will welcome the members of the G20 with open arms. And we need effectively the support of all the people here, including the track record of this successful summit meeting that was hosted by our dear country, that is India. I will be very much honored to welcome you all to the Rio de Janeiro summit in November of 2024.
But one final point as I wrap up NDTV's coverage of G20 is this. This has not been a standard process, a standard get-together of world leaders in the national capital. This has been an all-of-government, all-India effort which has stretched from Kashmir to Lakshadweep, to the northeast of the country, to Gujarat in the west. There have been hundreds of meetings which have taken place at the level of ministers and Sherpas, hundreds of rounds of negotiations as well, and finally we have arrived at a consensus which no one really believed would take place a few months back. But yes, that consensus on that key issue of Russia and Ukraine did come as a result of the help of 2 key parties. Number one, Indonesia, Brazil working very, very closely, and South Africa working very, very closely with India. And secondly, outstanding young and middle-level IFS officers who waded through difficult negotiations to push through India's point while accepting the arguments made by several other countries to ensure that consensus happened. With a host of NDTV journalists, producers, camera people and technical crew, this is Vishnu Shom signing off from the Mandapam here in New Delhi.